Уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа, мы рады приветствовать вас на открытии второй конференции, ежегодной конференции «Гострочинский экономичный форум». Мы очень рады, что тому интересу, который вызывает это событие, и мы старались, чтобы это было интересно и с точки зрения пленарных заседаний, и с точки зрения каждой секции. И мы надеемся, что это послужит, как это может быть, это такая немножко уже затертая фраза, но все-таки именно той платформой для диалога и тем возможностям по обсуждению путей развития Беларуси, каких-то новых взглядов, новых точек зрения, и мы очень надеемся на интересные дискуссии во время панельных секций. Для открытия конференции я хотела бы предоставить слово министру экономики Республики Беларусь Снабкову Николаю Геннадьевичу.
Спасибо большое. Доброе утро. Классически начну свое краткое вступительное слово, надеюсь, краткое, с благодарности организаторам, с искренней благодарности, потому что на самом деле, я считаю, данное мероприятие, которое проходит в нашей стране второй раз уже, является уникальной площадкой обсуждения проблемных вопросов не сегодняшнего дня или не только сегодняшнего дня, а что гораздо более важнее, проблемных вопросов будущего. И уникальность ее заключается в том, что плохое слово уникальность. Уникальность ее заключается в том, что она не сформирована сверху, а она сформирована снизу. А правительство, с учетом моего представительства здесь, горячо поддерживает такой формат и такой ход обсуждения. Большое спасибо всем модераторам, выступающим, которые приехали к нам. Для нас очень важно будет ваше мнение, ваша позиция, ваши рейтинговые оценки в дальнейшем для нас тоже будут важны. Поэтому в этом зале все ключевые заинтересованные стороны. Заинтересованные, уважаемые коллеги, в чем? Заинтересованные в динамичном развитии Республики Беларусь, которая, в принципе, ни с теории, ни с практики немыслима без динамичного развития частного сектора. Поэтому, собственно говоря, это одна из идеологий сегодняшних обсуждений и сегодняшнего заседания. Что такое динамичное развитие частного сектора? Я полагаю, что прежде всего, помимо экономического роста, прежде всего это динамичное развитие человека, поскольку в конечном счете все происходит в любом обществе от человека и для человека. Поэтому повышение качества жизни человека – это и есть основа развития страны. Причем развитие страны в долгосрочном периоде. Экономический форум, Кострычницкий экономический форум – это конструктивный диалог между бизнесом, между государством, между международными организациями и, что самое важное, между научным сообществом. Какая цель наших обсуждений? Цель наших обсуждений – это формирование эффективных правил, эффективных институций, которые в дальнейшем будут формировать не только экономическое поле страны, но и жизненное пространство страны. Что, опять же, повторюсь, с точки зрения жизнедеятельности гражданина, жизнедеятельности человека является особенно важным. Сегодняшнее замедление экономической активности обусловлено не только объективными неблагоприятными внешними факторами. Страна столкнулась со значительными внутренними ограничениями, носящими структурный характер. Поэтому приоритет экономической политики сегодня и на среднесрочную перспективу – это изменения, модернизация, реформы. Эти действия назвать по-разному можно, но модернизация не как задача по формуле деньги, технологии, лицензии, производство. Модернизация в большей степени, и исходя из сегодняшних панельных дискуссий, участники данного форума прекрасно понимают это. Модернизация как проблема. В ее решении универсальных подходов нет. Это всегда национальная уникальная форма. Неповторимое соединение в конкретно взятой стране формальных, с позволения сказать, и неформальных институций, повышающее энергетику взаимодействия в целом, и позволяет стране развиваться в среднесрочной перспективе по более высокой траектории. Я полагаю, что есть два основных условий успешности модернизации, изменений, реформ. Первое, что самое важное, это думать о долгосрочной перспективе, а не о сегодняшнем дне. Вторая, успешность модернизации может быть только в системе самореализации и самовоплощения человека, то есть при стимулировании его предприимчивости со стороны государства, при стимулировании его инициативности со стороны государства. Тогда можно говорить о успешности модернизации. Таким образом, это проблема, и на самом деле решить ее не так просто в контексте конкретной страны, в контексте сегодняшнего дня, и на это направлены, на мой взгляд, прежде всего, Кастрычинский форум и аналогичные форумы, которые происходят в Республике Беларусь. В том числе, могу заверить вас, именно на это направлены и дебаты, споры, предложения, которые происходят в правительстве. И с точки зрения формирования национальной стратегии устойчивого развития до 2030 года, и с точки зрения более среднесрочной перспективы. На наш взгляд, спрогнозировать технологию, спрогнозировать возможное предприятия к 2030 году невозможно. Но смоделировать на основе конкретных действий со стороны правительства, со стороны бизнес-сообщества, со стороны научного сообщества, спрогнозировать, какой должен быть человек к 2030 году, это основная задача и самая сложная задача, поскольку, как я начинал выше, на мой взгляд, от человека и для человека осуществляется все. Иногда за железками мы забываем об этом, а этот форум, на мой взгляд, и правильное размышление общества о своем будущем, они должны быть направлены прежде всего на эти цели. Поэтому и экономический рост в большой степени зависит от частного сектора. Не от частного сектора как такового, а от частного сектора, который формируют люди, и насколько они будут способны, свободны, инициативны, будет зависеть частный сектор, его развития, а соответственно экономический рост страны. Динамичный частный сектор, безусловно, является источником конкуренции, источником инвестиций, инноваций и новых рабочих мест. Опять же, к модному слову инновация. Инновации без предприимчивости, без риска невозможно. Государство имеет для этого две основные функции. Развитие современной, соответствующей текущей ситуации и долгосрочным ожиданиям правовой и институциональной базы, которая честно, прозрачно, своевременно отвечает интересам бизнеса, работника и потребителя, то есть гражданина. Второе, это правительство должно выйти за рамки, о чем я уже говорил, но это важно, выйти за рамки реагирования на текущие проблемы, то есть быть более активными, проактивными, если угодно, в проектировании будущих потребностей, а самое главное, в сегодняшней подготовке к ним, поскольку они начинаются с детского садика, они начинаются со школы. В качестве ближайшей перспективы мы видим обеспечение в рамках задач правительства, мы видим обеспечение регламентации, правовой регламентации частно-государственного партнерства, деятельности хозяйственных обществ, лицензирование ценообразования и создание единой антимонопольной системы. Эти мероприятия, в принципе, на данный момент все осуществляются. Мы предполагаем просто сохранить их динамику с, на наш взгляд, соответствующими результатами, которые мы увидим. Параллельно с созданием базовых условий назрела необходимость модернизации поддержки малого и среднего бизнеса. И в этой связи Министерство экономики очень плотно работает со Всемирным банком по формированию как стратегии развития малого и среднего бизнеса, так и организации содействию развития малого и среднего предпринимательства, которое вперед в себя самый лучший мировой опыт. Поэтому, уважаемые коллеги, достижение цели возможно только если элиты будут объединены в направлении достижения этих целей. Научная элита, бизнес-элита, правительство. Ну, вы понимаете, что в теории еще есть военная элита и так далее, но вместе с тем объединение элит общества на достижение цели является основой результата. Поэтому я призываю и сегодняшний форум, и призываю в принципе бизнес-сообщества, экспертов, аналитиков быть более позитивными в оценках, быть более открытыми для взаимодействия с правительством в достижении целей и нацеливать себя на конструктивный диалог в большей степени, нежели на критические высказывания, которые иногда на самом деле носят монетарный характер, не учитывая психологизмы, не учитывая отношение населения к тем или иным процессам, не учитывая многие факторы, с которыми мы вынуждены считаться, потому что определенное социопсихологическое поле, оно существует, и быстро поменяться оно не может. Для этого нужно, по крайней мере, смена поколений. Уважаемые коллеги, я постарался кратко высказать свои мысли по поводу данного собрания, по поводу форума. Я еще раз очень рад, что вы все здесь. Я желаю вам продуктивной, конструктивной работы. Если вы в результате ваших дебат сформулируете некое резюме, если это предполагается, да, то правительство и Министерство экономики будет еще более признательно вот тому продукту, который выкристаллизуется в процессе вот этой мозговой атаки, которая сегодня в этом помещении, в рамках этого форума, я уверен, состоится. Большое вам спасибо, хорошего продуктивного дня и успехов в достижении целей совместно. Спасибо.
Большое спасибо, Николай Иванович. И теперь для слова представляется Павлу Владимировичу Данейко, который скажет свое видение и свое, скажем так, напутствие нам для этой конференции от организаторов.
Напутствие, конечно, обременяет сразу. Доброе утро, надеюсь, доброе утро. Я хочу сказать пару слов от организаторов этой конференции. Здесь у нас 3 организации представлены, 4, которые организуют это мероприятие, 3 синтенка и Ассоциация европейского бизнеса. И таким как-то странным образом, я там то ли директор, то председатель совета, то член совета, поэтому могу говорить сразу от имени всех организаций. Спасибо, что вы пришли. Спасибо, что вы уделяете внимание нашим инициативам. Это форум всего лишь 2-й, но он развивается. И мы уже в этом форуме сделали маленькую площадку для бизнеса, где бизнес высказал свою позицию. Я надеюсь, что в следующем году мы расширим эту площадку, и наверняка эта конференция будет состоять из 2 дней. Одна а-ля инвестиционный форум, другая а-ля экспертное сообщество о возможностях развития экономики. И наше желание было всегда расширять максимально диалог в стране между всеми группами, заинтересованными в развитии страны, в развитии экономики. И я думаю, что эта площадка именно то место, где этот диалог может быть эффективно реализован. И я надеюсь, что мы будем вовлекать к участию все более широкие круги заинтересованных в нашей стране людей в развитии нашей экономики. Безусловно, здесь происходит не только обмен мнениями, но и узнавание новых вещей, потому что мы много сейчас проводим исследований частного сектора нашего, и чем больше мы занимаемся этими исследованиями, тем больше мы понимаем, как мало мы знаем о той экономике, в которой и той стране, в которой мы живем. Так что я бы хотел пожелать всем участникам узнать как можно больше о стране, о той экономике, которая есть в Беларуси, и внести свою лепту в это коллективный поиск решений для нашей страны, для элит наших, для групп, принимающих решений. Какие-то идеи, чем больше их будут реализованы, тем больше шанс, что какие-то идеи будут реализованы, и это будет шагом вперед в развитии нашей экономики. Спасибо вам большое и хорошей работы на сегодня всем нам.
Уважаемые коллеги, я вас прошу не расходиться, мы буквально за 1 минуту просто поменяем таблички и сядут участники пленарной дискуссии. На самом деле, во время выступления и министра экономики, и Павла Владимировича Данейко было очень четко обозначены основные вызовы, которые стоят перед экономикой, и то, что бы мы хотели на этой конференции осветить, обсудить. И поэтому во время пленарных докладов мы попытались на эти вызовы как раз и посмотреть с этих 2 сторон, как 2 стороны медали, внутренние и внешние вызовы. И поэтому мы начинаем наше пленарное заседание именно с внутренних вызовов, потому что это, конечно, очень важно, как бы ни менялся внешний мир, но если у тебя не происходит структурная трансформация экономики, как говорил Николай Геннадьевич, не происходят структурные, ты не отвечаешь на те проблемы, которые возникли именно с точки зрения структурной трансформации, структурных реформ, то, естественно, просто по определению у тебя будут проблемы и на внешних рынках. И поэтому в качестве нашего первого доклада у нас будет выступление главы представительства Всемирного банка в Беларуси Ян Чулкима, который как раз и осветит проблемы и вызовы структурных реформ в Беларуси.
Thank you very much. My name is Young Kim, the country manager for Belarus from the World Bank. I named this presentation a beginner's guide to structural reform in Belarus because I feel that I am a beginner, inexperienced in this part of the world, and only arrived in January of this year. So before launching on the presentation, I'd like to ask your forgiveness for a very simplistic way of looking at the issue of structural reform in Belarus. But I found two very nice pictures on one of the architectural sites. On the left is an imaginary building that has many layers and facade. So if you peel away the first layer, another building comes, and the buildings all, look of the buildings all are different. And then on the right, it's the, I think, emblem of orderliness in Belarus. How beautiful this National Library is, particularly at night. So we're heading from the complicated design to a simple but beautiful design. The order of presentation would be in the form of discussing the potential of Belarus from a newcomer's perspective, and then why, to achieve the potential, why the structure of the economy needs to change. Then what are the steps? First, reducing the existing imbalances, but based on the underlying capacity that perhaps not everybody sees. And then the way of how do you change the structure of the economy? Is it reconstruction or remodeling? In other words, is it a big bang or a gradual approach? And then I pose lots of questions as a beginner, because there are ideas and questions popping in my head every day, and I can't make a firm view about what the right approach is. To simplify the issue, I saw an article a couple of days ago on Human Development Index of the United Nations Development Program. And I put the data, juxtaposed the Human Development Index data with per capita income data from the World Bank. And all these blue dots represent the sample in that exercise. So over 150 countries. On the left side, I have plotted the log of gross national income against the Human Development Index. Human Development Index goes from 0 to 1. And for Belarus, which is the red dot, we have 0.78 on the horizontal axis. And I fitted a trend line through the sample and posed the question, given the level of human development in Belarus and looking at similar countries that have as high an index as Belarus, what should Belarus's income be? And just by simple extrapolation, we see that the peers in that group have almost twice the income of the current Belarusian national income per capita. If we look at the raw data, which is not log scale, the pattern is much more stark. Translating the $6,480 per capita income today with what could be the potential of Belarus in the future, we are talking somewhere around $12,000, $13,000. And indeed, this was the first question that I asked when I arrived, because looking at the neighboring countries, Russia, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, with the exception of Ukraine, per capita income in the neighborhood was much, much higher. So that immediately told me that probably there's a not so complicated way of achieving that level of income and prosperity in Belarus. Human Development Index apparently is constituted by looking at education and health and many other gender development index and many other dimensions. But I took two out of those and looked at education level, and Belarus scores exceptionally high, almost 90 percentile on the Education Development Index. Using the same approach of extrapolating to what is possible in per capita income, we get to even higher level of income than what the previous composite human development index shows. For health, it looks like Belarus could do much better in getting the health outcome in terms of longevity, in terms of communicable diseases, and so on. So the countries with similar level of income as Belarus are higher in health development index than Belarus. What this shows is that because there is a basis for building skills, and because there is a huge potential for improving the health and longevity of the workers, you have a slightly declining population, but you can make people live much longer and contribute to the increase in income. So why change the economic structure? It's a very equitable society where the poverty has declined very rapidly over the years. Has even lower poverty rate than many countries with higher income. But why change the structure? I looked at the peripheral variables and concluded that the economic environment, global economic environment, has changed drastically. There is stronger competition in Belarus's export markets, but also in the domestic market because of past liberalization. Productivity, meanwhile, has stagnated, and you will see very clearly on a chart that I will show you, relative to the real wages, which have continued to rise. And lately, inventories rising inventories has been in the news in the order of 80%. Everybody talks about the need to privatize, but actual private investor interest in Belarus seems rather weak. And then, therefore, it's becoming increasingly expensive to sustain the current system. And we talk about the ICT sector and the high-tech park, and that being the driver of growth and innovation. But when we look into this, it's software engineering, and a big part is about developing games, World of Tanks, is it? And I worry about changing fads. What happens when consumer preferences change, and where is the industry going to be? And it's relatively small, $523 million exports or turnover last year. The external environment is not very favorable, has not been in the past years, and but the minister acknowledges that's not the only reason why we need to think about structural reform, but it is an issue. This graph shows the projections done in April of 2014. I didn't put the October projections, which are even worse, but we do this at the World Bank every 6 months. Comparing different regions, the highest projected growth is in East Asia, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia. It's not in this part of the world where the trading relationships for Belarus is more important. Indeed, for Europe and Central Asia, we have the lowest projected growth of 1.9%. This is before the intensification of the Ukraine crisis and the embargoes and other restrictions placed on Russia or vice versa. So the current projections are quite conservative. In the main trading partners of Belarus, we projected Belarus to go into the negative growth territory. We may be proven wrong slightly, but not by far. Russian growth projection in April was about 1%. We are now saying the baseline is 0, possibly negative. The high upper bound could be 1%, but unlikely. So, and this is comparing to the very faint bars that represent the projections that we did a year ago in April 2013. And you can see the extent to which the projections have been revised downward. Talking about Russia's zero growth projection, how does that impact the surrounding countries? And we see the export dependency of various countries in the region, and Belarus has the highest dependency on the Russian market. So the growth in Russia is unlikely to support growth in Belarus. Even with the temporary diversion or possible diversion of trade in food and other restricted items from Europe. 1 year is very, very temporary, and there are other side effects. I worry about inflationary, export of inflation from Russia to Belarus. If we look at the recent few years and dissect the composition of growth, we see that agriculture has stopped growing and started to decrease. We see that industrial output also has been on a downward trend, picking up mildly. And this is production, not the effective sales or exports. It's production. And then construction sector, which played a key role in the last few years, has now turned the corner downward. The only sector that is really holding up that the growth that we have seen so far, low growth, 0.9 last year and perhaps 1% this year, is the retail trade. And that is me selling you things and you selling me things, and there's not real production going on. So how long can that be sustained? If we look at the industrial structure, dominance of the state enterprises is shown on various dimensions. We looked at wages, and we saw that overall in the economy, because wage increases have been granted steadily to that dominant sector, growth in wages has now outstripped the growth in productivity. And this is comparing the data in the last decade, 2000 to 2010. And this is why we're hearing the proposal to fix or index wage growth to productivity growth at the firm level. Indeed, looking from early 2012, the gap between stagnant productivity growth and real wage growth has widened and continues to widen, although the slope is now tapering off. And then the problem of inventories. I didn't quite understand what 80% inventory rate means, because I have never seen it anywhere, not even in Africa. So, you produce 100 refrigerators every month, and you can only sell 20, so you put your refrigerators in a storage, and you hope you will sell 180 next month. But you continue to produce 100, and therefore you end up with 160. And it keeps on piling up. So, I thought, how much should the working capital be? Because you have to buy metal, you have to buy different components, and you have to put them together, but you cannot sell and recoup the cost of making those refrigerators. And I went to Atlant factory recently and saw these boxes piled up, 3-4 layers high. And this is a serious concern. So I don't have, many more charts to argue why structural change is needed. But anecdotally, investor interest seems to be low. We have a pilot privatization program where we're trying to use Austrian funding to help facilitate the privatization of 8 enterprises. These were pre-selected and cleared for privatization by His Excellency the President. We are possibly likely to privatize 1 of 8, and then there are 2, 3 more in the works, which, for which some investor interest has been expressed, but has been in 2-year exercise. Where are the investors? And why can't we get the investors to be interested in buying up these very valuable assets? And then, because of inventory, because of productivity stagnation, and because the carrying cost, interest cost in the global market is creeping up, it is now very increasingly more expensive to maintain the current system. So I saw that last year government announced that they would be reducing the level of subsidies, I think, to 70% of the previous year. These are choices that are forced upon Belarus. And then lack of apparent growth driver. I think we need to find that growth driver. And I think there is. There are many in the growth drivers in Belarus. So what is the first step? I mean, if I am an investor and I'm asked to look at all these different factories and production lines and find something that I like, but I'm worried if I put in $100 and convert that into rubles in order to buy these local currency denominated assets, and there's a prospect of depreciation, serious depreciation, because we see from the external position of Belarus that Belarus has been running chronic current account deficit. I mean, it is chronic if we're talking about the last 10 years. So that is an issue. We need to resolve that. In many countries, you adjust through exchange rates. 1998 Korean financial crisis, or the Asian financial crisis. I mean, I lost a hell of a lot of money. Had assets in Korean won, and then IMF came and they said, well, exchange rate from tomorrow is no longer 1,000 per dollar, it's 1,900 per dollar. So that happens, and we see a gradual depreciation of the Belarusian ruble. It is necessary. I think it's not enough. And I will show a chart later on. Okay, here's the chart. I did a small paper for the new Korean government and compared, who are the competitors of South Korea. These are India, Brazil, China, and the fast-growing BRICS. And I looked at the historical exchange rate, I think from 94 onwards, and this is real effective exchange rate indexed to what is thought to be the equilibrium rate for respective country. And drew a line with 100 as being the equilibrium. And we see the red line is Korea. the dotted lines are all the competitors. So there has been a tendency to promote exports by depreciating your currency systematically for a long period of time, and this is why people are applying pressure to China to depreciate yuan and so on. So, and then now, Japanese have announced this program to inject liquidity into the market. That will depreciate Japanese yen even further than now. Europe has been depreciating very steadily but very clearly against the dollar. And the tendency is quite similar. Belarus is following that tendency, but if we look at the reaction time, the level of nominal adjustment we have seen in the last 2 years, 3 years, has been much more mild in Belarus than in other countries. So if you have the money to run down your reserves and ensure that there is an orderly depreciation of the currency, that's fine. But our reserves are quite low, exceptionally low. So I think the speed of reform also matters because the other competitors are running with the effects of gains on competitiveness through the exchange rate depreciation. Favoring the state enterprises, we said this is increasingly more costly. But look at the starting point. By 2010, the total loans outstanding in the economy, 95% were to SOEs or mixed SOEs. Only 5% to pure private sector companies. And in the SOEs, the National Bank's survey shows that there is excess labor, some 27% in the industry, also 27% in construction, and overall in average industry-wide 10% excess labor compared to the private sector. Private sector, when they face pressure, they have to reduce the cost, and one mechanism is to lay off workers, or use temporary workers, or reduce the amount of time they work on a production line. But that possibility of adjusting the inputs has been severely limited in the state sector. Why? Okay. But then there are upsides to the story. I have been going to various factories. I asked Minister Snupkov I would like to see 2 per month, and I think I have just about kept that pace because I'm searching for the underlying good news. One good news. This is MAZ, this is MTZ. And the usual story I hear is there's no scale, economies of scale, the production line is dirty and the air quality is bad, and you don't have spiffy looking tractors to the quality that can be exported to the US market. Okay. I looked at the website and searched for this type of a tractor, and John Deere has it. Okay. There are something like 76 tractor producers in the world, but most of them assemble pieces that are made by other people, other companies. MTZ and the structure beneath it, the supply chain, it's all Belarusian. Every single component, I mean, bulk of the components can be made from Belarusian sources. And on top of that, Belarus has the capacity to design and modify. I mean, not every country has that kind of capacity. Korea in the 1960s produced one car which has 3 wheels. Okay, not the Hyundais and whatever of today. Belarus produced a truck in, I think, 1941. And we need to build on that capacity. The scientific and technological level in Belarus is significant. If we look at the military-industrial complex, we know that it had a significant role in the system that stood up to the Western defense industry. And when you apply that technology to commercial uses, you get a company like this called Adani Systems. I went there, I took my vice president there, and we were all surprised that this kind of genuine local grown technology exists. But they produce low radiation scanning machine. At the border in Brusky and Berestovica, you have these scanners which are imported. The driver has to get off the truck because there's high radiation. This company produces low radiation, and you can sit in that truck and have less than, a fraction of the radiation that you would get riding on an airplane. That's the explanation the company gave, so I was amazed. Medical instruments, all these, I think, are hope for building a dynamic economy, because that underlying capacity is something that your ancestors have invested in and you don't have to pay for in order to develop that. The education system is capable of producing skilled labor. It's organized. Maybe the content needs to be updated, but it still is capable of supplying the workers to these different types of economic activity. The workforce is exceptionally well disciplined, and the scientific and technological research which continues in the academic institutions. I looked at some of the pamphlets in the visits to the universities, and they're very broad and fundamental technologies. But they are being undervalued, perhaps sold at dirt cheap prices to your foreign competition. But this applied to the local industry, plus the booming ICT software engineering, if it were to be applied not to the world of tanks, but to the modernization of the industries, it should have a huge impact. But then the skilled labor has to be able to move around and pick better places to work in and better products to sell and develop and sell. In a system where there is not much labor mobility, there's reduced opportunities for learning by doing. I mean, we don't learn how to give these kind of presentations in school. You learn on the job. And it's only when you repeatedly do production, engage in production, that you will have this learning by doing and innovation. If we have an inventory rate of 80%, we have a serious problem. You only continue to produce what you already know how to produce. You do not look for a different niche product. That needs to be fixed. And the government has a huge role and the ability to facilitate skills development and labor reallocation. So the question is, Is it one building which is newly being constructed? It's relatively quick and easy to do. But you need to have the capital. You need to have investors to come and build that for you. So. Or the remodeling that's going on in the neighborhood where our office is. Preserving the historic look of the buildings and architectural design. Inside, there's all kinds of work going on, breaking floors and putting fiber optics cables and so on. And that is much more difficult to do. You need to embark on such remodeling project with a very good design and the plan. So here are the questions that I pose to myself and I pose to everybody I meet. Structural reform to some people seems very easy. I have met foreign visitors who said, well, we need price liberalization in this country and it can be done by one presidential decree. Because president issues decrees. But that's not the price control that we're talking about. We're not talking about 49 items or 50 items on the price control list. We're talking about transfer pricing from one firm to another, to the next firm and beyond. And if you introduce a market price in that vertical price transfer pricing regime, possibly the whole value chain could collapse. Which ones do you want to preserve? Which ones are likely to be competitive? Those are the kinds of choices that have to be analyzed, yet we make those heroic assumptions that it's the lack of political will and the desire to maintain the current system of social contracts and employment contracts and so on. I do not think it's that simplistic. I think it is actually very difficult to have structural reform, particularly when your macro situation is not very stable. We experienced this in the years after the financial crisis in Asia. It was not easy to go through structural reform without sacrificing some segments of the economy. So what is the right sequence? In my mind, I think this is a country where it has been, savings has been much lower historically than the investments. And the gap, the savings investment gap, is covered by foreign savings. In order to continue to attract that foreign savings and expand the resource envelope, we have no choice but to attract foreign investors into the country. And stabilizing macro environment is the first step. Because even if I think this firm is good, I will not put money into an environment that will drastically change the outcome, devaluing the profits by 50%. But it happens. Ease of doing business, we look at doing business reforms. I don't know how many video conferences we have sat with various ministries, talking to the doing business team in Washington, arguing whether this reform and that reform has been taken into consideration. And at some point, I think in 2012, Belarus was one of the fast movers in doing business reforms. But have we looked at the amount of FDI that came into the country? Has it made material change in encouraging the private sector to grow? I think the fair answer is no. And therefore, we need to go beyond the symbolic doing business reforms and tackle issues that are fundamental. I mean, to get visa into Belarus is hard enough. When you come here and stay over 5 days, you need to go to the police station and register. And my own experience is I had to wait 2 hours, diplomatic privilege. The others wait 4 hours, 6 hours. How many investors will go and confront the policeman who will give you a stamp and not think that this is ridiculous use of my time? I am a rich investor bringing money to this country. Why continue with this archaic practice when this was a procedure cooked up when the country and the whole Soviet system was very closed? Now it's extremely open, but the perception that you give is they don't want us, the investors. There's actually not much room for maneuver, neither in the public spending or family household budget, nor the private sector envelope. Fiscal sustainability is an issue because there is lower growth and lower revenue projections, and you have to tighten the public spending, and you have to become more efficient in delivering services. So structural reform in Belarus's sense may need to go into service delivery of health, education, and others. And then borrowing perhaps is not the answer. We need to entice investors to take up equity and put direct investment. So I think that clear roadmap needs to be shown. Whether it's right or wrong is irrelevant. You need to show the map to the investors. And then structural reform is not just one-off event. If we go over this phase of structural reform, there will be other questions raised, and you need to continue to repeat different sets of structural changes in order to get to the level of 20,000, 25,000 income level of the neighbors. So these are just questions that I put to you for today's discussion, not my definitive recommendations on structural reform. Thank you very much.